things are getting spicy in the world of Xbox. Microsoft passes Sony in one key metric, and they also call them out and saying they're a bunch of liars. I think it's fair to say the gloves are off, my friend, because Microsoft came out swinging this week, really just kind of calling Sony out on a couple different ways. And so let's just dive into the details. So earlier this week, Microsoft released their earnings, as they do every quarter, because they're required to do that. And from that information, we were able to conclude that Xbox didn't have the greatest quarter. Now, we all kind of know why, because there weren't any blockbuster titles dropped in 2022. They were all pushed, as we all now know, into 2023, and hopefully not any further. But the numbers kind of speak for themselves. Xbox hardware revenue was down 13%, and overall content and services were down 12%. It was a rough quarter for Xbox, and realistically not the best year for Xbox, despite the fact that they have some momentum with a value-priced console that they were selling for $199 during the holidays as part of the reason why their revenue was down, and also their margins for that matter, but although Microsoft doesn't explicitly clarify their margins. But during the earnings call, Microsoft dropped a little bit of information. It's the first time we've heard this number in a while about their daily active users, I should say monthly active users. And Microsoft said explicitly here, he being Satya Nadella, said, "We saw new highs for Game Pass subscriptions, game streaming hours, and monthly active devices. And monthly active users surpassed a record 120 million during the quarter." Now that is interesting numbers, specifically that 120 million figure, because Sony claims that they have about 102-ish million active or monthly active users as well, which means that Xbox is now officially larger than Sony. Now, there's a lot of muddling with numbers, which we'll talk about here in a second, but this came out during the earnings call, and unfortunately, we still didn't get a new and updated Game Pass subscription number. We still don't know churn numbers, and so you can also look into the tea leaves here a little bit when they talk about streaming hours and monthly active devices, but the point of this little note that the CEO dropped was like, hey, we are continuing to grow. We are setting new boundaries and reaching new users across the board, which brings me into the question of what exactly is a monthly active users. Now, typically people are going to be thinking it's Xbox Live, it's Xbox Gold, it's Game Pass Ultimate, there's can be some muddling of numbers here. So we know for sure it's obviously anybody who's turned on an Xbox and logged in with their Microsoft account. That includes free users, that includes Gold, that includes people who play Game Pass, and we would assume that they would not count twice people who are paying for Live and for Game Pass. That should be one user, but you got to look beyond and broaden the ecosystem. Microsoft actually talked about how Fortnite bringing that to iOS devices was a huge boon for them. Now, I don't know if it's still doing as well because things have evolved on the Fortnite side. That being said, Microsoft is very clearly counting anybody who used an iOS device to stream a game, anybody who used a browser. They're likely counting PC gamers as well. And I do wonder if they ever are counting people who potentially opened an Xbox app but maybe didn't engage with a game or something else like that. Now you might be saying, Brad, that's crazy talk. They would never say opening an Xbox app is a monthly active users. You bet your bottom dollar they would. And there's actually proof of this. Previously, Microsoft, when they were touting Cortana, said it had hundreds of millions of users every single day. But what they were counting is every time you hit the Windows key and you search. So if you had a Windows key and typed Word back in the day of early Windows 10 launch, they would consider that a Cortana interaction, not a search. And so they really juiced those numbers. So take the number of 120 million monthly active users with a little bit of salt, but either way, we haven't heard a number like this from Microsoft in a while, and very clearly they're using that to pump it up Xbox because they know what was happening during this time period. Now, the reason why things were obviously muted in 2022 was because all the content got pushed. Now, this was a really big week for Microsoft. Not only did we get this 120 million figure that shows that Microsoft does have some momentum in the gaming industry, they also are finally really starting to drop games and give us definitive dates that are going to make 2023 potentially their best year ever. Granted, we didn't expect 2023 to be this jam-packed, but because 2022 didn't live up to expectations and things got pushed, that is the way the cookie has crumbled, my friends. And so this week, just this week alone, we got Hi-Fi Rush, which was a shadow drop. It's an interesting game. I've played probably over about 100 minutes now. It's definitely a button masher with some music tossed in. If you're looking for a music game with some button mashing tossed in, it's not quite there, but it's an interesting title, and it's really unique artwork, and I think it should do well for Microsoft. Then also, they dropped GoldenEye 007 is now part of Game Pass this month as well. So you've got two titles that just hit that are pretty big. One, you've got one unique original, and then you've got that nostalgia bait with 007. And then you can't forget here in the next coming days, we're going to see Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, which that will be coming online. So in the span of about a week or so, there's 3 new titles, two nostalgia baits, if you will, and one brand new title coming. And then we have Minecraft Legends in April, Redfall in May, Forza in the spring, maybe. We have Elder Scrolls, I believe, happening in June. And then there's also Starfield, which is going to have its own event coming online sometime this spring, as long as they continue to hit their deadline. The reason why I say Forza in the spring is last June for E3, Microsoft said, hey, it would be launching within a year, and it should be June 2023. But it looks like they just now have switched up the language to just 2023. And so it wouldn't surprise me if we don't see Forza until later this year, which could be okay if Starfield is going to take, because Frank Shaw, the head of global communications for Microsoft, kind of came out in a little bit of a rant last night. I think is probably the best way to describe what he is talking about here. He very clearly is targeting Sony, who claimed, by the way, that they are that they are not working with Sony at all. And you can read his tweets here and try to understand where he's coming from. But the nutshell version is Sony is in Brussels with the EU saying, look, Microsoft is not willing to work on any of this stuff. And, you know, you don't see this too often from Frank. I've known Frank for many, many years, and he is very clearly a little bit perturbed about this. And he's just calling them out and saying, Sony, yeah, we are actually trying to work with you. We have offered you deals. We've offered you just about everything you can imagine. And Sony's behind the door saying, nah, they really haven't. Probably because Sony's saying something like crazy, like, the only thing you can offer us is not to buy, I don't know, Activision Blizzard. And Microsoft's like, well, bro, that is probably not going to be happening because, well, we'd like to spend the money and we got $70 billion committed to this. And so here we are. But yeah, so that was a little late night tirade that Microsoft is not holding back when it comes to calling out Sony and their shenanigans related to their attempt to try to buy Activision Blizzard. We will see, but either way, Microsoft, at least Frank Shaw, wants to make it known that Microsoft is in fact trying to be a good steward of this acquisition, but we'll see. The courts will, have the final ruling on a lot of this stuff, but we are far from being over at this point. I just thought that was fun. So I really think that 2023, and it's a little redundant, I'll be completely candid and say that I think this is going to be an interesting year for Game Pass because Microsoft, they cleared the deck for 2022 and they have loaded up 2023. They are really going all in this year. You can already look at the launch cadence for the first half of the year, and we believe they're going to be lining up stuff hopefully for the second half of the year. And I'll be interested to see if there aren't substantial Game Pass growth this year, subscriber counts this year. This could be a really interesting turning point for Microsoft and their strategy because they are spending a ton, literal billions of dollars. If you add up all their acquisition, it's somewhere around like over $80 billion that they are easily spending on acquisitions to try to build out this service. Now, granted, I think Microsoft is probably in the only company on the planet right now who can actually deliver this. NVIDIA's kind of there, but Microsoft is the only company that has the technology to do game streaming and has an actual catalog. Sony could do this, but they are pretty far behind. Microsoft is the only company in market trying to steal this segment, become the, as we all like to say, Netflix of gaming. We'll see if they can get there. As it's turning out, it's not an easy thing to grow a subscription service like this, even if you have a decent catalog. And so with all of these titles coming online this year, and hopefully ABK joining the fold, we will have to see if Game Pass can truly find a footing and actually start to see that hockey stick growth that Microsoft really needs to justify these continued big dollar investments into the service. I do think that they are best placed for us. We all know what's happened with Google. Amazon's kind of playing around. Facebook doesn't. I think Facebook would struggle significantly. NVIDIA has the technology, but potentially they don't really have a back catalog. And so we will have to see what 2023 brings for Game Pass. I think it's going to be super interesting for Xbox. I think there's a lot to digest and to really be watching these numbers. We got to really be watching these numbers. It's one of my favorite things to do. So as always, if you want to stay updated on everything happening in the world of Xbox and beyond, make sure to keep it subscribed here because the only BS on this channel is me.